The butler's voice trembled as he stared at the security footage. "Mr. Hart, it's her, the country girl you were supposed to consummate the marriage with last night. She's the one who woke up the old master. My name is Nora Lynn." My mother picked it out after flipping through a dictionary until the pages were worn thin, hoping I'd always remember my roots and live a peaceful life. But in my 22 years, peace was never part of the equation. At 3, I was snatched from the entrance of St. Mary's orphanage by traffickers. At 5, I was sold to a rural family as an indentured ward. At 15, their son died in a car accident, and his family cast me out like a jinx. $20 in my pocket, 40 miles of mountain roads to walk back to the city on foot. That was when I met Grandpa Lin, a retired traditional Chinese physician who ran a small herbal clinic in Chinatown. He took me in as his granddaughter and poured every ounce of his knowledge into me. The year he passed, I was 18. He told me, "Nora, you were born for this calling. Don't bury your gift." I kept the clinic alive for 2 more years, until the bulldozers from the Urban Renewal Project parked themselves at the doorstep, and now here I am. I'm sitting on a massive European-style carved wooden bed, 2.8 meters wide, wearing a crimson chipao embroidered with golden phoenixes that catch the lamplight and glitter. The crystal chandelier above me is bigger than my old bedroom. The snow-white wool carpet under my bare feet feels soft enough to sink into, like walking on clouds. The bridal suite, my bridal suite, but not a marriage I chose. 7 days ago, Mr. Reeves, the Hart family's notoriously efficient estate manager, found his way to my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn. He slapped a contract onto my rickety folding table. The contract was thick, 20-something pages of dense legalese, but the core message boiled down to one thing: marry Derek Hart, the head of the Hart Group, for 1 year, and receive $1 million in return. $1 million, that number, to me back then, was astronomical. It was life-saving money. After the clinic was demolished, I'd been scraping by with part-time work at the Queen's Community Health Clinic, living in an 8-square-meter studio where I could hear my neighbor snoring through the paper-thin walls. Grandpa Lin's medical texts and formulas were locked in an old leather suitcase under my bed, gathering 3 layers of dust, because no legitimate hospital would hire a young woman who hadn't even passed her assistant physician's license exam. But the Hart family wasn't looking for a doctor. They were looking for a daughter-in-law, more precisely, a fortune bride. Walter Hart, the family patriarch, 70 years old, had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage 3 months ago. After surgery, he'd slipped into a deep coma, and the top specialists had declared him a vegetative state. The family had exhausted every option, domestic and international experts, Western medicine, traditional remedies, everything. The old man wouldn't wake up. Finally, Eleanor Hart, the matriarch, made the call. She said her husband had always talked about wanting to see his eldest grandson married. Now that he was lying there, maybe a wedding would bring some luck. Maybe, just maybe, the old man would be so pleased he'd open his eyes. Derek Hart, of course, refused. Who is Derek Hart, CEO of the Hart Group? He took over the family business at 26 and quadrupled the company's market value within 2 years. Ruthless, decisive, feared across the business world. They call him the Reaper. A man like that would never accept some country girl as his wife, but Eleanor laid down the law. Either he marries the fortune bride, or she donates her entire stake in the Hart Group to charity. As formidable as Derek is, he couldn't outmaneuver his grandmother's 35% founding shares. So here I am. The Hart family's criteria were very specific. The birth chart had to align, the bride's fate had to be strong enough, and her background had to be spotless. I met all 3 conditions, especially the last one. No family, no connections, no backing. As Mr. Reeves put it, I was a clean slate. In other words, easy to handle. When the 1-year contract expired, a check would send me on my way, and I'd never make waves. I signed because $1 million meant I could rent a small storefront again. It meant I could take the assistant physician's license exam. It meant not being jolted awake at 3 a.m. by my neighbors screaming at each other. It meant not walking 40 minutes to work just to save $2 on bus fare. Tonight is the wedding night. The ceremony was held in the garden of Hart Manor, not a grand affair, just close family. I kept my red veil on the entire time, guided through the rituals by the wedding coordinator, never once seeing the groom's face. All I remember from the vows is the tall figure beside me carrying the sharp, cold scent of cedarwood. His arm occasionally brushed my wrist, and his touch was icy like the man himself, utterly devoid of warmth. When the coordinator announced the couple would be escorted to the bridal suite, a crowd of people swept me into this absurdly luxurious room, and then nothing. The groom never set foot through that door. I look at the dragon phoenix candles on the nightstand, The wax has pooled into thick layers, the flames swaying, casting the red. Double happiness characters on the wall into flickering light and shadow. Outside the window, the night deepens, the garden insects have gone quiet, the entire manor feels like an empty city. I get up and walk to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. Down in the courtyard, the wedding flower stands haven't been taken down yet. White roses and champagne lisianthus look almost mournful in the moonlight. Further off, a row of low buildings, the east wing of the manor. That's where the old master has been kept since he fell ill, with round-the-clock medical care. A night breeze drifts in, carrying the bite of late autumn. I rub my arms and start to pull the curtains shut when something in my peripheral vision catches my attention. A blinding cluster of lights has flared up in the east wing. Not regular lighting, multiple flashlight beams, swinging wildly, figures running. The distance makes it hard to hear clearly, but the urgency, the panic, I can feel it across the entire garden. Something's wrong. I throw off my covers, slip my feet into the new red silk shoes by the bed, and head for the door. The bridal suite is on the 3rd floor. The hallway is empty, lined with dark red plush carpet and framed oil paintings. I sprint down to the 1st floor lobby and finally hear voices. Mr. Reeves's voice, coming from the side hall, trembling unmistakably. Have you reached Mr. Hart? What? His phone's off. How can it be off? Then call Blake Chen, call his secretary, call everyone, now. Mr. Reeves, Mr. Chen says Mr. Hart is at a critical business dinner at the Harborview Hotel tonight. He gave orders not to be disturbed. To hell with business dinners. The old master is dying. Call again. I follow the voices. In the side hall, 5 or 6 people are gathered. The estate manager, 2 nurse aides in white uniforms, and a middle-aged housekeeper. Every face wears the same expression, terror. The old master's condition must have taken a sudden, catastrophic turn. I stop at the doorway, hesitating for half a second. Grandpa Lin once told me, Nora, the cardinal sin for a healer is standing by while someone dies, whether you hold a license or not, whether the person in front of you is a billionaire or a beggar on the street. If your skills can save a life, you never turn your back. I take a breath and step inside. Mr. Reeves, what's happened to the old master? He turns, startled to see me. His brow knots. Mrs. Hart, why are you down here? This doesn't concern you. Please go back to your room. Tonight is already chaos enough. I don't answer. I walk past him beyond. The side hall is a door leading to a corridor, and at the end of that corridor is the old master's private care room. The Hart family set up his sick room on the 1st floor, presumably for easier access during emergencies. Mr. Reeves blocks my path. Mrs. Hart, what are you doing? You can't go in there. Move. My voice is quiet but firm. It catches him off guard. He probably never expected the submissive, docile bride from this afternoon to speak in that tone. While he's still processing, I slip past him and hurry down the corridor. The door to the care room is half open. Inside, chaos. 3 medical staff surround the old master's bed, one adjusting the ventilator, one monitoring the ECG, and an older doctor shining a penlight into the patient's pupils, shouting, Mr. Hart, Mr. Hart. Can you hear me? The ECG monitor shows a nearly flat line, with occasional weak spikes like a dying frog's last twitches. Blood oxygen saturation has dropped to the 60s and is still falling. The old master's face is ashen, his lips purple, he's sunken into the mattress, nothing but skin and bone. One glance is all I need. In traditional Chinese medicine, this is what we call qi collapse, severe depletion of vital energy, pale face, drenching sweat, ice-cold extremities. A thread-like pulse on the verge of vanishing. In Western terms, his organs are shutting down in rapid succession. Without immediate intervention, he won't survive the night. Who let people in and out? Close the door. The older doctor barks without turning around, clearly mistaking me for a curious family member. I ignore him. I walk straight to the bedside and press my fingers to the old master's wrist. What are you doing? The doctor whips around, staring at me like I've lost my mind. I close my eyes. 3 fingers rest at the Kungwankai pulse positions, reading the faint, barely perceptible beat beneath my fingertips. 15 seconds, 20, 30. I open my eyes. The diagnosis is clear. His pulse is so weak. It's like a candle flame about to be snuffed out. But there's something else, something wrong. At the superficial level, the pulse is nearly gone. At the deep level, there's a blockage. This isn't simple exhaustion of qi and blood. Something is obstructing the flow. What medications have you given him? I ask. Turning to the doctor, he pulls down his mask, a man in his 50s, his name badge reading Dr. Philip Zhao, Chief of Neurology. Mercy General Hospital. He looks me up and down, from my red chipao to my silk shoes, and his mouth twitches. And who might you be? I pause, still not used to the title. I'm Derek Hart's wife, Mr. Hart's wife, Dr. Zhao lets out a laugh, not a polite one, more like he's just heard a bad joke. Family members are asked to wait outside. We're in the middle of a resuscitation. Please don't interfere with our work. Prepare epinephrine, for push. Dr. Zhao turned to the nurse and gave the order. You can't use epinephrine. The words came out so fast that even I didn't realize how absolute my tone was. Dr. Zhao's hand froze mid-air. He turned around slowly, his expression shifting from dismissive to irritated. What did you say? The old master's pulse is faint at the superficial level but sluggish at the deep level. The inch position is thin and weak, while the bar and cubit positions show a taut, string-like quality. This isn't simple heart failure with qi collapse, it's blocked qi flow with an unresolved excess pathogen. This is a case of deficiency with excess. If you use epinephrine to force his heart rate up, it's like taking a whip to a horse that's already run to its limit. The numbers might look better for a moment, but the consequence will be accelerating the dissipation of his vital essence. By then, no one, not even the gods, could pull him back. When I finished speaking, the ward fell silent for a full 5 seconds. Dr. Zhao's expression went from initial contempt, to stunned disbelief, to a furrowed brow, and finally settled into something complicated and unreadable. He was a Western-trained physician, and I was speaking entirely in traditional Chinese medicine terminology. But a good doctor always has a shared understanding of pathological changes in the body. He had clearly grasped the core of what I was saying. There was an unresolved problem inside the old man's body, and forced stimulation would only make things worse. You, Dr. Zhao started to speak, but the nurse behind him suddenly let out a sharp cry. Dr. Zhao, the old master's heart has stopped. Everyone's eyes snapped to the monitor. The green waveform that had been weakly pulsing just moments ago was now a flat white line. The machine let out a piercing, shrill alarm, a continuous, unbroken beep that filled the entire room. Dr. Zhao's face went white in an instant. He practically lunged to the bedside, pressing his interlaced hands against the old master's chest to begin CPR, shouting between compressions, "Defibrillator. Get the defibrillator ready." The nurse scrambled to wheel the defibrillator over. Dr. Zhao grabbed the paddles, applied conductive gel, and pressed them against the old master's gaunt chest. A dull thud. The old man's body jerked once. The line on the monitor didn't move. Again, voltage to 200 joules. Another shock, still nothing. Sweat beaded on Dr. Zhao's forehead in droplets the size of soybeans. Gritting his teeth, he delivered a third shock, a fourth, a fifth. Each discharge from the defibrillator came with a muffled thump, and the old man's body rose and fell each time like a shell without a soul. But that white line remained white. The air in the room felt solid, frozen. Everyone held their breath, the only sound being the monitor's relentless shriek, grating against eardrums until they ached. Dr. Zhao's hands began to tremble. He was the chief of neurology at Mercy General Hospital, a name that carried weight in the city's medical circles. He had been treating old Master Hart for over 3 months now. The old man had never woken up. But at least his vital signs had been maintained. If the old master died in his hands tonight, for whatever reason, his reputation would be ruined, and this was the Hart family, of all families. One more. Dr. Zhao's voice came out hoarse. He lifted his wrist to check his watch, his lips moving as if making a final, agonizing calculation. By medical convention, if the heart doesn't show signs of recovery after a certain period of arrest, death can be declared. Dr. Zhao, it's been 7 minutes. The nurse whispered, her voice thick with tears. Dr. Zhao closed his eyes, his hand slowly lowered. Everyone's gaze was fixed on him, waiting for the final verdict. That was when I moved. I picked up the bottle of medical alcohol from the bedside table, unscrewed the cap, and poured some into my palm, rubbing my hands together. Then I lifted the thin blanket covering the old master and exposed his feet. His feet were skeletal, the veins on the insteps bulging, toes curled inward, nails thick and yellowed. I wrapped my palm around his left foot, found the Yongquan point with my thumb, and pressed down hard. What do you think you're doing? Dr. Zhao snapped back to attention and reached out to stop me. Mr. Reeves. I didn't look up, pressing harder with my thumb. Please move Dr. Zhao aside. Don't let him interfere. Mr. Reeves, standing at the door, was stunned by my command. He looked at Dr. Zhao, then at me, his mouth hanging open, unsure whose orders to follow. I said. I lifted my head, my gaze passing over Dr. Zhao's shoulder and locking directly onto Mr. Reeves's eyes. Have them all step back. The old master can still be saved, but if we delay any longer, no one, not even the gods, can bring him back. My tone was calm. So calm it sounded like I was stating the most ordinary thing in the world, but Mr. Reeves's pupils contracted sharply, because he saw something in my eyes, certainty, the kind of certainty he had seen in Derek Hart's eyes before. It was the look of someone who had absolute conviction in what they were doing. Dr. Zhao, please, step aside for now, Mr. Reeves heard his own voice trembling. Dr. Zhao's eyes went wide. He looked at Mr. Reeves, then at me, and finally, as if conceding something, stepped back 2 paces. He crossed his arms over his chest and stared at me with an expression that said, "Let's see how you get yourself out of this one." I ignored him. All my attention was on the old master, both thumbs pressed simultaneously, alternating between the Yongquan points on both feet. Each press landed precisely on the starting point of the kidney meridian, the force sinking from shallow to deep before slowly releasing, rhythmic, like the ebb and flow of tides. Yongquan is the foremost acupoint for emergency yang revival. Grandpa once told me, when a person is at death's door, their yang energy scatters. You must gather the remaining yang from the lower burner and condense it anew. Yongquan is that door. After about 2 minutes of pressing, I released my hands. I picked up a clean cup from the bedside table, poured half a cup of warm water, and then reached into my clothing. It was a palm-sized deep blue cloth pouch, tied at the mouth with a red cord, the acupuncture kit I always carried on my person. I pulled the cord loose, and the pouch opened to reveal 24 silver needles arranged in a row, glinting with a faint, cold light under the lamps. This set of needles was Grandpa's legacy to me. He had carried them his entire life. I drew out a 3-inch silver needle, sterilized it with an alcohol swab, and pressed my left hand against the old master's abdomen, locating the Chihai point. Chihai, you're going to do acupuncture. Dr. Zhao couldn't hold back. This is absurd. The old master's heart has already stopped. What good is poking near his navel? Are you saving a life or performing a ritual? I didn't answer him. The needle was held between my right thumb and index finger. I aligned the tip with a spot about 2 finger widths above the Chihai point and inserted it slowly, not vertically, at an angle, slanting upward, the tip directed toward the diaphragm, approximately 4 to 5 degrees, to a depth of 1.5 inches. Grandpa had taught me a technique called the soul anchoring needle, which he had learned from a wandering Taoist priest in his youth. It was specifically for reviving yang and rescuing from collapse in critical emergencies. The core of this technique wasn't in the point itself, but in the angle, depth, and the manipulation of the needle during insertion. The old master's condition wasn't a simple cardiac arrest. There was a mass of stagnant qi trapped in his chest, blocking the flow between upper and lower, disrupting the harmony between interior and exterior. Chihai is the sea of vital essence. By guiding the needle upward at this angle, I was using it as a conduit to draw down the turbid qi lodged in his chest. Once the needle was in, I held the handle between thumb and index finger and began to gently rotate it. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, 36 rotations clockwise, then 24 counterclockwise. This was the meridian reversal technique. Tarnify with the clockwise, reduce with the counterclockwise, tarnify first then reduce to unblock, reduce first then tarnify to consolidate. What I needed now was unblocking, to clear the obstructed qi flow. After the final rotation, I released my hand. The tail of the needle quivered faintly in the air, emitting a barely audible hum. The ward was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, beep, the monitor sounded, not the continuous alarm, an intermittent, rhythmic tone. Everyone's head snapped toward the screen. On that white line, a green spike appeared, then a second, a third, a fourth, the intervals growing shorter, the waveform becoming clearer. The heartbeat went from nothing to something, from weak to gradually steady, like a whale fighting its way up from the abyss, breaking through the surface again and again, finally returning to the sunlight. That's impossible, Dr. Zhao murmured, all the color draining from his face. I didn't stop. I drew 2 more needles from the kit and inserted them into the Naguan points on both of the old master's wrists. These 2 needles were for calming the spirit, regulating qi, and harmonizing the blood. Combined with the needle at Chihai, the 3 needles worked together to restore the old master's qi flow. When I finished, I stepped back 2 paces and let out a long breath. The back of my red chipao was soaked through with sweat, the fabric clinging coldly to my skin. Those few minutes of intense concentration had drained me more than 10 consecutive surgeries. The numbers on the monitor kept climbing. Heart rate recovered from 0 to 58. Blood oxygen rose from 62 to 89, and blood pressure was slowly recovering. The deathly grey had faded from the old master's face, replaced by a sickly pallor, but at least it was the color of the living. Dr. Zhao rushed to the monitor, checked the readings 3 times over, then bent down to examine the old master's pupillary light reflex. Finally, he straightened up and looked at me like I was some kind of monster. "You, who exactly are you?" "I told you, Derek Hart's wife." I wiped the sweat from my forehead, my tone flat. Just then, rapid footsteps echoed from the corridor, leather shoes striking the marble floor, each step carrying an undeniable weight of authority. The door swung open. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, at least 6'1", likely more. His black tailored suit was impeccably cut, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing the sharp lines of his collarbone. His features were deep-set and hard, high brow bone, a nose carved like a blade, thin lips pressed into a firm line. He stood there like a drawn sword, but what drew the eye most were his eyes, pitch-black pupils, deep and fathomless, churning with barely contained fury, like leaden storm clouds pressing low before a tempest. Derek Hart, my new husband. He'd clearly come straight from a business dinner. The faint scent of alcohol clung to him, mingling with that cedarwood cologne, sharp and unmistakable in the close air of the sickroom. Behind him trailed a young man clutching a briefcase, sweat beading on his forehead, his assistant, Blake Chen. Presumably. What happened? Derek Hart's voice cut through the room, low, metallic, cold as a blade. His gaze landed first on his grandfather's face, confirming the old man was still breathing. Then it swept over Dr. Zhao, over the trembling nurses, and finally settled on me. His brow furrowed, as if trying to place who I was. 3 seconds later, he remembered. "What are you doing here?" His tone was ice, no warmth, no inflection, like he was interrogating a stranger who'd trespassed onto private ground. "Mr. Hart." Mr. Reeves cut in before I could answer, his voice cracking with excitement. He grabbed Derek's arm with one hand and pointed at me with the other, his finger shaking. "Check the security footage. Please, sir, check the footage." Derek glanced at him, then at the camera mounted in the corner near the ceiling, then back. "What footage?" he asked flatly. "The East Wing cameras. I pulled it up just before you arrived." Mr. Reeves swallowed hard, his pointing finger trembling even more violently. The old master's heart stopped for 7 minutes. Dr. Zhao was about to call it. He was ready to pronounce him. But she brought him back from the brink with a single needle, one needle, just one. By the last words, his voice had gone completely shrill, like a man who just witnessed a miracle. Derek's gaze returned to me this time. He looked for a long time. Those dark eyes traveled from my face to the needle kit in my hand, from my sweat-soaked collar down to the red silk shoes dusted with grime. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened, slowly, like a fist closing. "What method did you use?" he asked. "Acupuncture." I rolled the kit back up and tied the red cord. "I didn't hire a Chinese medicine practitioner." "I know. Then why did you do it?" "Because the things I know how to do, Mr. Hart, you've never had any interest in learning." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Everything that had happened tonight had already blown far past anything I'd expected. All I wanted now was to peel off this sweat-soaked chipao and sleep for 12 hours. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. It was the precursor to anger, but he didn't snap. Instead, he turned to Dr. Zhao, his voice returning to its usual hard-edged composure. "Dr. Zhao, I hope tonight was the last time something like this happens." Dr. Zhao's face went pale. He stammered out a string of reassurances. "Of course, Mr. Hart. You can count on me," and fled the room with his nurses in tow. That left 4 people in the room: me, Derek, Mr. Reeves, and Blake Chen. Derek stood by his grandfather's bedside for a long moment, looking down at the old man's steady, rising chest. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. Then, with surprising gentleness, he reached out and tucked the corner of the blanket around the old man's shoulders. His hand was striking, clean knuckles, long fingers, strong. On the ring finger sat a brand new wedding band. Catching the light with a cold, sharp gleam, he turned to me abruptly, his gaze cutting like a knife. "You, come with me." He walked out without waiting, his dress shoes clicking against the floor in crisp, deliberate steps. No room for argument. I drew a deep breath, tucked the needle kit into my sleeve, and followed him out of the room. The corridor's cold draft hit me the moment I stepped through the door, and I couldn't suppress a shiver. The tall, cold silhouette ahead of me didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even slow down. I stared at the back of his head and thought one thing: Derek Hart, you owe me more than an explanation. He didn't take me to the bridal suite. He took me to his study in the manor. The study sat at the end of the third-floor corridor, Heavy oak double doors swung open to reveal a wall of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, crammed with hardcover volumes on economics and management. Some of the gold-embossed lettering on the spines had faded with age. These were books that had been read, not decoration. He didn't sit. He walked behind the desk, braced both hands on its edge, and leaned forward slightly, a panther coiled to strike. Talk. 2 words, no emotion attached. I stood on the other side of the rosewood desk, a good 2 meters between us. Honestly, the distance made me feel safer. At least he couldn't reach out and grab me by the throat. What would you like me to say, Mr. Hart? Your identity. He lifted his eyes to me, and there was something deeply unsettling in that gaze, a kind of X-ray penetration. The file Mr. Reeves gave me on you. Orphanage, adopted, foster parents deceased, ran a small clinic in the old district. For 2 years, then worked odd shifts at a community clinic after it was demolished. A very clean resume. So clean it reads like a whiteboard that's been deliberately wiped. He paused, the corner of his mouth curling into a faint, mocking smile. But a nurse working odd shifts at a community clinic doesn't bring a man back from the dead with 1 needle after his heart's been stopped for 7 minutes. Dr. Zhao is the chief of neurology at Mercy General. He was out of options. You weren't, so who the hell are you? The way he said nurse dripped with undisguised contempt, as if the word itself was a punchline. Heat flared in my chest, but I kept it off my face. Grandpa Lin used to say that arguing with someone who refuses to be reasonable is the fastest way to waste your breath, and explaining yourself to someone who's already slapped a label on you, that's just asking for humiliation. Mr. Hart, I said, keeping my voice level, does my contract require me to give you a full biography? You pay, I perform, 1 year. Then we're quits. What I can and can't do doesn't seem to fall under the terms of our agreement. Derek's eyes narrowed again. He straightened slowly, came around the desk, and walked toward me step by step. With each step, the cedarwood cologne grew stronger, and the pressure of his presence, that raw, masculine authority, closed in like an invisible net. My instinct screamed at me to step back, but my red silk shoes felt nailed to the floor. I forced myself to stand still. He stopped half a step from me, looking down too close enough to see the faint stubble along his jawline, the tiny mole at the corner of his eye, the unapologetic aggression radiating off him like heat off a furnace. You think you're clever. His voice dropped so low only the 2 of us could hear. Put on a little show tonight. Make yourself look valuable, then stay in the Hart family forever. Nora, I've seen this trick 100 times. I looked into his eyes, inches from mine, and almost laughed. He thought I was performing. He thought saving his grandfather tonight was a play for his attention, a calculated move to make myself indispensable. Mr. Hart, I said, stepping back to reclaim some space, you have a remarkably high opinion of your own appeal. His face stiffened slightly. First, I came downstairs tonight because I heard a commotion. It wasn't some prearranged scheme. Second, I saved your grandfather because my grandfather taught me that letting someone die when you have the skill to save them is a violation of the healer's oath. That has nothing to do with you or the Hart family. Third, I raised 3 fingers. The $1 million is legitimate compensation written into my contract. I get paid, I do the job, I don't need to curry favor with anyone. And as for staying in the Hart family, I smiled. But the smile didn't reach my eyes. When the year is up, Mr. Hart, even if you get on your knees and beg me to stay, I'm not sure I'd say yes. The study went silent for 3 full seconds. Derek stared at me, and his expression shifted from the initial scrutiny and contempt to something far more complicated, like a man examining what he'd assumed was a forgery, only to discover genuine brushwork hiding beneath the glaze. He opened his mouth to speak, but the desk phone rang. The shrill ring echoed through the cavernous room, ripping through the tension like a tear in fabric. Derek frowned, turned, and picked it up. What? Blake Chen's voice came through the line. Urgent enough to be audible even from where I stood. Mr. Hart, Dr. Zhao asked me to pass something along before he left. Your grandfather is stable for now, but the situation is still precarious. He strongly recommends asking Mrs. Hart to take over the ongoing treatment plan. The emergency measures she used today are completely outside Western medicine's framework. He's worried that if something similar happens again, they won't be able to handle it. Derek was silent. He held the receiver, his gaze drifting across the desk to land on me. His dark eyes churned with calculation, a man weighing costs and benefits in his head. Finally, he said into the phone, "Understood." Then he hung up. He didn't speak to me right away. Instead, he walked to the window and pushed it open. The late autumn night air rushed in, cold and sharp, riffling the papers on his desk. He lit a cigarette, The ember flared briefly at his fingertips, then the pale blue smoke scattered into the darkness. "What's your price?" he asked at last. He didn't turn around, his voice came to me diffused by the wind. "What do you mean?" "Staying to treat my grandfather." He turned, cigarette between two fingers, and pointed at me. "I don't believe you saved him out of some healer's oath. Everyone has a price. What's yours? Name it." I stared at him for 5 seconds. This man had lived in the world of commerce for so long that he'd stopped believing any motivation existed beyond money. In his logical framework, everything was a transaction, everything had a price tag, everything could be measured in dollars, but the inconvenient truth was right now, I did need money. "My price is this," I said. "The contract stays in effect, the $1 million remains unchanged, but my movements are no longer restricted by the Hart family. During your grandfather's treatment, I come and go as I please. The Hart family covers the cost of any herbs and equipment I need, and the treatment plan is mine alone to decide. No one interferes, including you." Derek Hart tapped the ash from his cigarette, a faint, knowing smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "That doesn't sound like a condition. It sounds like you're trying to get rid of me, Mr. Hart. You're a busy man. Surely you don't have time to sit at home every day watching me." I tilted my head slightly. "Besides, you just said it yourself, didn't you, that I'm a woman with ulterior motives? Well, then I have to carve out a little room to maneuver for myself, don't I?" That was deliberate. I said it just to get under his skin. It worked. He paused mid-motion, the cigarette freezing in his raised hand for a beat, then he let out a short, dry laugh. "Fine." He ground the cigarette but into the ashtray with deliberate pressure. "I accept your terms. But one thing, if anything happens to my grandfather, you bear full responsibility." Naturally, I turned and headed for the door. Halfway there, a thought struck me, and I looked back over my shoulder. "Oh, one more thing, Mr. Hart." He raised his eyes to meet mine. "You said you've seen plenty of women who want nothing more than to stay in the Hart family. But have you ever considered—" I pulled the door open, then glanced back with a small, measured smile, "that maybe, to some people, the Hart family isn't worth nearly as much as you think it is." Before he could react, I stepped out of the study and pulled the door shut behind me. A low, muffled thud echoed through the wood. A second later, the sound of a fist slamming into a desk. I leaned against the corridor wall and let out a long, shaky breath. Only then did I notice my palms were slick with sweat. While those defiant words had been flying out of my mouth one after another, my heart had been pounding so hard it felt like it might leap out of my throat. Derek Hart's presence was overwhelming. Holding my ground in front of him for 5 minutes was more exhausting than 2 hours on an operating table, but at least I'd gotten what I came for. I would treat the old man, not because I owed the Hart family anything, but because every life lying in a hospital bed deserved to be taken seriously. That was the lesson Grandpa had spent his whole life teaching me. I couldn't let him down. It was nearly 2 in the morning by the time I made it back to the bridal suite. I peeled off the sweat-soaked red chipao, folded it neatly at the foot of the bed, and dug through my travel bag for a clean set of cotton pajamas. The bag was small, it held everything I owned. A few changes of clothes, Grandpa's medical texts and prescriptions, and that deep blue acupuncture kit lying in bed. I stared up at the crystal chandelier overhead and replayed the night's events in my mind. The old man's pulse had been faint and scattered on the surface, with a blockage lurking underneath. That was a classic sign of blocked qi flow combined with vital essence depletion. The cerebral hemorrhage surgery had left residual blood stasis that hadn't fully absorbed, and months of bed rest had weakened his internal organs. Qi and blood couldn't circulate properly, and that imbalance had finally triggered tonight's multi-organ failure. The soul-anchoring needle had stabilized him for now, but that was only treating the symptoms. If I wanted him to truly wake up, he needed a complete treatment plan combining acupuncture and herbal medicine. I turned over, half asleep, mentally listing which herbs I'd need to pick up from the pharmacy tomorrow. My consciousness drifted into darkness before I finished the thought. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my internal clock woke me without fail. Dawn was just breaking outside. Birds were already singing in the manor's garden. I washed up quickly, pulled on my faded navy jacket, the one that had been washed so many times the color had gone soft and pale, and opened the bedroom door to head downstairs. The corridor was silent. Derek's study door stood shut, and I couldn't tell whether he'd spent the night in there or already left. I kept my footsteps light as I made my way toward the staircase. As I passed the floor-to-ceiling window at the landing, I caught sight of the black Maybach sitting in the courtyard below, headlights on, Blake Chen holding the rear door open. Derek emerged from the front entrance, dressed in a fresh navy suit, his hair combed back with military precision, Every inch of him radiated that cold, untouchable aura. Just before he bent to get into the car, he paused and glanced up toward the third floor. I instinctively stepped back half a step behind the curtain. The look lasted only a second, so brief I couldn't even be sure what he'd seen, but that single glance sent a chill crawling up my spine, even from down there, even with an entire floor and a pane of glass between us. That man's gaze was like a precision javelin, it could find you anywhere. The Maybach rolled out through the wrought iron gate, its taillights disappearing down the private driveway lined with oak trees. I exhaled and continued downstairs. Outside the old man's sickroom, there was a new figure standing guard, a young man in a black suit, early 20s, lean but clearly trained. The muscle definition in his arms strained the fabric of his sleeves. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up and gave a slight bow of his head. Mrs. Hart. My name is Ryan Fang. Mr. Reeves has assigned me to handle Mr. Hart's security from today onward. If you need anything, just give the word, security. I turned the word over. In my mind, translation, he's here to watch me. Derek still didn't trust me. That was expected, though. A man who could reshape the business world with a flick of his wrist wasn't going to drop his guard just because I'd saved his grandfather once. His agreement to my terms was a temporary concession. The surveillance would never stop. Thank you. I appreciate it. I nodded at Ryan and pushed open the door to the sickroom. Dr. Zhao was already there, standing in front of the monitor, studying last night's data curves. He turned at the sound of the door, and the expression on his face was far more complicated than it had been last night. Embarrassment, confusion, and a reluctant but undeniable trace of respect. Mrs. Hart. He settled on the neutral form of address, his tone several degrees more courteous than before. The old man's heart rate stayed around 60 all night. Blood oxygen saturation held steady above 93%. Blood pressure is essentially normal. He's still in a deep coma, but his vitals are far more stable than before. I walked to the bedside and took the old man's pulse. It was significantly stronger than last night. The kidney pulse at the Chi position had gained some root. The severe imbalance between the three pulse positions, Kun, Guan, and Chi, was gradually correcting itself. The needle I'd left in his Chi point overnight had done its work. His Chi flow was noticeably smoother now. I withdrew the silver needle, replaced it with a fresh one, and inserted it at the same point, this time at a shallower angle than last night. Instead of the meridian reversal technique, I switched to the green dragon tail technique. The needle tip swayed gently within the point, like a fish lazily flicking its tail through still water. Dr. Zhao stood beside me, his eyes fixed unblinkingly on my hands. Mrs. Hart, if you don't mind my asking, how exactly did you do it last night? His tone was sincere now, no trace of the mockery or disdain from the night before. I glanced up at him. For all his initial arrogance, this Dr. Zhao was at least someone genuinely hungry to learn. The theoretical framework of Chinese medicine differs from Western medicine, I explained. What I did is called reviving yang to rescue from collapse. The core principle is clearing blockages at the level of Qi flow. Your grandfather's body hasn't fully absorbed the residual blood stasis, and prolonged bed rest has caused Qi and blood to stagnate. That stagnation formed a blockage point in the chest and diaphragm. When that point completely severs the flow of Qi between the upper and lower body, you get what happened last night, what Western medicine calls multi-organ failure, and what Chinese medicine calls sudden Qi collapse. Dr. Zhao listened with a look of partial understanding, but he was clearly trying to absorb every word. And what exactly does that needle do? The Qi point is a critical acupoint on the conception vessel. By needling it at a specific upward angle, I use the needle as a guide to draw down the stagnant turbid Qi trapped in the chest and diaphragm. Think of it this way: when Western medicine performs surgery, it creates a physical pathway. My needle creates a pathway at the level of Qi. He nodded thoughtfully, his gaze drifting to the acupuncture kit in my hand. Then he asked the question that mattered most. When will the old man wake up? That was the real question. I withdrew the needle, tucked the blanket around the old man, and stood up to look at his sunken face. Optimistically, there should be changes in his consciousness within a week, but for him to truly wake up, the follow-up treatment plan has to keep pace. I'll write out a list. I need to pick up several herbs from the pharmacy. Dr. Zhao's eyes lit up. A week? Are you sure? 80% certain. Those two words changed everything in his expression. As a clinician, he knew exactly what 80% meant in the medical field. For a coma patient, a problem that stumped the entire world, any doctor who dared claim 80% certainty was either insane or holding a winning hand. And after last night, He knew I wasn't insane. I wrote out the prescription on a sticky note and handed it to Ryan, telling him to arrange for someone to pick up the herbs. Ryan took the note, hesitated, and glanced at Dr. Zhao. Dr. Zhao waved his hand quickly. Ryan, this is the Hart family's decision, I won't interfere. But this prescription, he leaned in to scan the list of herbs on the note: ligusticum, peach kernel, safflower, red peony, salvia, earthworm, acurans. This is a modified version of the blood-activating decoction. I looked at him with a flicker of surprise. A Western doctor who could recognize the composition of the blood-activating decoction. This man wasn't entirely ignorant of Chinese medicine. That's right, the core ingredients are all there, plus a few additions targeting the qi blockage, I explained. What the old man needs right now is to move qi, invigorate blood, and break up the stasis blocking his meridians, dissolving the blood clot in his brain. While mobilizing the body's qi flow, acupuncture alone can only open the blockage point. To keep that channel open, we need herbs to consolidate it. Dr. Zhao was silent for a moment, then suddenly pulled out his phone. Mrs. Hart, if you don't mind, I'd like to report your treatment plan to the hospital. To be honest, after what happened yesterday, I think Mr. Hart's treatment has taken a path no one ever considered. If this path actually works, it would be significant for the entire medical community. Suit yourself. I waved a hand dismissively. I meant it. Right now, all I could think about was the old man's treatment plan. What Dr. Zhao chose to report, and to whom, was his business. The next 3 days passed in steady, monotonous rhythm. Every morning at 6, I took the old man's pulse, adjusting the acupuncture points and techniques based on what I felt beneath my fingertips. In the mornings, I brewed a decoction and administered it through the nasogastric tube. In the afternoons, another round of needling, followed by massage therapy on his arms and legs to keep the muscles from wasting away. Day by day, the old man's condition improved. His complexion shifted from that sickly, ashen gray to something closer to pale but alive. His lips regained their color. The numbers on the ECG monitor grew more encouraging with each passing day, until even Dr. Zhao couldn't hold back his amazement, calling it the most remarkable recovery he'd witnessed in 30 years of practicing medicine. Derek Hart hadn't shown his face in 3 days. According to Ryan, he'd flown to London to negotiate an acquisition and wouldn't be back before the weekend at the earliest. But I knew the business trip was just a convenient excuse. The real reason was that he didn't want to look at me. Or rather, he didn't want to face the fact that after abandoning his brand new wife on their wedding night to attend some business gala, that same wife had turned around and saved his grandfather's life. The irony was so sharp it could cut, sharp enough that even a man like Derek Hart didn't know how to handle it. On the morning of the 4th day, I was in the dispensary watching the clay pot simmer when Ryan pushed through the door, his expression off. Mrs. Hart, Madam Hart is here, Madam Hart. The family matriarch. I wiped my hands, turned the flame down low, and followed Ryan toward the ward. I'd be lying if I said my stomach wasn't doing a little flip. I'd heard about the old ladies standing in this family from Mr. Reeves. She was the anchor that kept the Hart ship from capsizing. After Walter collapsed, she'd single-handedly held the entire clan together, even forcing Derek to marry me in that fortune wedding that had been her doing. Start to finish, the ward door was open. Before I even reached the threshold, I could hear voices from inside. Walter, look at you, you've wasted away to nothing. The old lady's voice carried a mother's ache, but there was no weakness in it, just the kind of steel that only decades of weathering could forge. I stepped inside and saw her for the first time. 70 years old, silver hair swept back in a flawless twist, a plum-colored cashmere cardigan draped over her shoulders, and on her wrist, a jade bangle so fine it seemed to glow with its own inner light. She sat at the old man's bedside, holding her husband's hand, her face a map of wrinkles carved by time itself, every crease holding a story. She heard my footsteps and turned to look at me. Her gaze was calm, not sharp, not cutting, just the gentle appraisal of an elder sizing up a younger member of the family. So you're Nora? She released Walter's hand and beckoned me closer. Come here, let Grandma get a good look at you. That word, Grandma, rolled off her tongue so naturally, as if I'd always been part of this family. As if I weren't just some fortune bride she'd shoved onto her grandson. I crossed the room and sat down on the stool across from her. She took my hand, turning it over and studying it for a long moment. Her eyes lingered on my fingers, on the thin calluses worn smooth by years of gripping needles, subtle, but obvious enough to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Mr. Reeves told me everything about that night. She patted the back of my hand. Child, Grandma thanks you. She spoke slowly, each word heavy as stone. You're a doctor, Saving lives is what you do, that's not what impresses me, but you stood up in that room, with everyone questioning you, everyone against you, and you chose to save an old man who meant nothing to you. That courage, that's what I admire more than your skill. Something tightened in my throat. In my whole life, I could count the times someone had praised me on one hand. Grandpa used to tell me I had a quick mind for medicine, but after he passed, no one had spoken to me like this. Not once. You're too kind, Grandma. Saving lives is simply a doctor's duty. I dropped my gaze. Unable to hold those two clear eyes, she shook her head. Duty and duty are different things. Same situation, one person looks away, another steps forward. The difference between those two people is everything. Child, what you did that night, Grandma won't forget it. Then, without warning, she slipped the jade bangle off her own wrist and started sliding it onto mine. The stone was exquisite, a deep, lush green so vivid it seemed to drip, catching the light with an oily, luminous sheen. Old mine. Glass jade, worth a fortune. And then some. I instinctively tried to pull my hand back, but her grip was stronger than I expected. She clamped down on my wrist and wouldn't let go. Grandma, this is too precious, I can't accept. You're a heart now. If this bracelet isn't for you, then who? She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, in that tone that left no room for argument. This was passed to me by my grandmother-in-law on my wedding day. Now I'm passing it to you. Once it's on your wrist, you're the rightful Mrs. Hart. Anyone who dares say otherwise can come talk to me. The moment the bracelet settled against my skin, something knocked hard against my chest. I hadn't felt this since Grandpa died, that feeling of being accepted without reservation, no conditions, no trade-offs, just your family now. But I wasn't family, I was a contract wife. 1 year, then I'd be gone. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words died in my throat when I met her eyes, warm, smiling, utterly certain. All right, I won't keep you from your work. She rose, bent down, and pressed a kiss to Walter's forehead with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Old man, you'd better fight. This girl's working her fingers to the bone for you. If you don't wake up, who are you letting down? She reached the door, then turned back. Oh, Nora, there's a small family dinner tomorrow evening at Derek's place. You should come, meet the rest of the family while you're at it. She said meet the family, but I read the real meaning in her eyes. She was putting me on display, giving me legitimacy in front of everyone. Before I could respond, she was already gone, cane tapping down the hallway. I looked down at the jade bangle on my wrist, the cool stone pressed against my skin like a gentle promise, but I knew better, gentle as it felt. The waters of the Hart family ran deeper and darker than the green of this bracelet. The next evening, Ryan drove me to Derek's private residence. Villa didn't do it justice. It was more like a small estate, at least 2,000 square meters, dominated by a 3-story modern structure with sharp, aggressive lines that matched the man who owned it. In front, a perfectly manicured lawn, and at its center, a minimalist fountain whose water caught the dying sunlight in shades of gold and red. I was wearing my best outfit, a navy knee-length dress with a cream knit cardigan I'd snagged on clearance for a little over $100 last year. My hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, my makeup so light it was practically invisible. When I walked into the living room, it was already full. Madam Hart sat at the center of the main sofa, surrounded by 7 or 8 men and women of various ages, extended family. By the look of it, I swept my gaze across the room, piecing together who was who. The middle-aged woman in expensive jewelry seated closest to the matriarch had to be Vivian Hart, Derek's stepmother, and the slick-looking young man beside her, that would be Evan, Derek's half-brother. Vivian wore a champagne silk dress, a strand of lustrous pearls around her neck, her hair in careful waves. Her face was well preserved, showing few signs of age, but her mouth had a natural downturn at the corners, giving her a permanently unapproachable air. Sure enough, the moment I stepped in, her gaze ran over me like a security scanner, head to toe, top to bottom, before landing on my dress, the one that cost less than $200. Her mouth curved down another few degrees. So this is the one Derek married. Vivian's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cutting clean through the room's chatter. Mother, you gave her the family heirloom bracelet. She wasn't talking to me, she was talking to Madam Hart, and the sour note in her voice was impossible to miss. Madam Hart lifted her teacup, blowing gently across the surface. It's mine, I'll give it to whoever I please. Vivian's expression flickered, but she didn't dare challenge the matriarch directly. Instead, she redirected her aim at me. Her smile was wide and polished, but the sharpness in her eyes was barely concealed. I heard you work at a community clinic. What did you study? Nursing? Or are you a nurse's aide? The question was a trap, carefully baited. Nursing or nurse's aide, she'd already framed every possible answer within the bounds of low-status work, leaving me no room for a third option. The room went quiet, every eye turned to me, curious, contemptuous, or simply waiting for a show before I could answer. Madam Hart spoke up. Nora studied traditional Chinese medicine. She saved Walter's life with a single silver needle. Vivian, the way you're asking these questions, someone might think you're interrogating a suspect. The matriarch's tone was light, but the protectiveness underneath was unmistakable. Vivian's smile froze for half a second before snapping back into that practiced society lady mask. Mother, I'm just being friendly. She's our new daughter-in-law. After all, nothing wrong with getting to know her better. Oh, she turned toward the door, her voice suddenly bright and warm. Serena's here. Come in, come in. Everyone's attention shifted. A young woman walked through the doorway. She was stunning, the kind of classic, polished beauty that turned heads, delicate features, porcelain skin, tall and graceful. She wore a blush-pink Chanel suit with a matching chain bag, radiating the effortless confidence of someone who'd never known want. But what caught my attention was her eyes. The moment she entered, her gaze flicked first to the staircase at the far end of the room, an unconscious gesture, carrying the weight of habit, of expectation. Then, and only then, did she turn her gaze to the sitting area, offering the old lady a warm, impeccably polite smile. Grandma, it's been too long. Ah, Yarlin, come sit. The old lady's tone was measured, neither warm nor cold. Vivian, however, acted as if she were greeting her own flesh and blood. She took the young woman's hand and guided her down beside her, then turned to me with a smile that carried the unmistakable glee of a cat toying with a cornered mouse. Yarlin, let me introduce you. This is Nora Lynn, Derek's new wife. She bit down on the words new wife with deliberate force, as if she were hammering a nail into a coffin. Nora, this is Serena Song, the eldest daughter of the Song & Co. fine jewelry empire, and also Derek's closest friend since childhood. She drew out those last few words slowly, so slowly that each syllable landed like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. Serena Song's gaze settled on me, sweeping me from head to toe. Her appraisal was subtler than Vivian's, but far more cutting, the look of one woman measuring another, weighing her worth, and finding her wanting in the same breath. Hello, she gave me a small nod, her smile polite and distant. Hello, I nodded back at that moment. Footsteps echoed from the staircase, leather shoes on marble steps, a steady, unhurried rhythm. Every head in the room turned toward the stairwell. Vivian's eyes lit up. Serena Song's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her spine straightening as she adjusted herself in her seat. Derek Hart descended the stairs. He wore a dark grey turtleneck, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms with clean, sculpted lines. At home, he shed the sharp edges of the boardroom, trading them for something more languid, more quietly commanding, but his eyes remained cold, sweeping across the room without lingering on anyone. Then he saw me. His stride faltered for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible crease appeared between his brows. Vivian seized the moment, rising to meet him. Derek, Serena came all the way here to see you today. You promised her dinner 3 months ago, and you've been putting it off ever since. Mom, he cut her off, his tone flat. This is a family gathering. Let's not discuss other matters. He walked straight past her to the sitting area, taking the empty seat beside the old lady. Not once did he glance at Serena Song. The smile on Serena Song's face flickered, just for an instant, but she recovered quickly, lifting the bone china teacup from the coffee table and taking an elegant sip. I noticed, though, that her knuckles had gone white around the handle. Speaking of which, Derek. Vivian pressed on, clearly not ready to let the matter drop. She settled back into her seat and launched into another round of performance. I hear your grandfather's been improving these past few days. You really struck gold with that wife of yours. She glanced at me, her eyes practically daring me to respond. But honestly, I'm curious. Vivian leaned forward, playing the part of the wide-eyed innocent. Nora, you work at that community clinic. How much do they pay you there? A few thousand a month. The room went silent again. This was humiliation, plain and unvarnished, in front of everyone. With a casual tone that pretended at innocence, she had reduced a person's entire worth to a dollar figure and laid it on the scale for all to see. The old lady's face darkened. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, rapid footsteps sounded from outside. Ryan Fang burst through the door, his face ashen. He hurried to the old lady's side, bent down, and murmured something in her ear. Her expression changed in an instant. She shot to her feet, her voice cracking. What? Derek rose as well, his eyes sharpening as he fixed on Ryan. What's going on? Ryan swallowed hard, his voice trembling despite his best efforts. Word just came from the manor, the old man. His heart rate suddenly flatlined again. Worse than last time. Dr. Zhao says this time it might be. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the word he couldn't bring himself to say. The air in the living room turned to ice. Then, from outside, the roar of an engine. A silver Mercedes Sprinter pulled up at the villa's entrance. The doors flew open, and two figures in white lab coats rushed toward the front door, carrying a stretcher between them. On the stretcher lay a man, Walter Hart. The stretcher was pushed directly into the ground floor reception room. Dr. Zhao followed alongside, his lab coat buttoned wrong, sweat pouring down his face, his lips moving but failing to form coherent words. A portable ECG monitor had been strapped to the stretcher's railing, its green waveform flickering weakly like a candle guttering in the wind each beat. Separated by an agonizing, breathless pause, I shoved past the people blocking my way and lunged forward. The moment my fingers touched the old man's wrist, my heart plummeted into my stomach. The pulse was even worse than last time. It had been a sudden collapse from blocked chi. At least there had been something to grasp beneath the surface. This time, the pulse was utterly scattered. No pulse at the superficial level, nothing at the middle level, at the deep level, only the faintest thread of a beat, as fragile as a spider's silk stretched to its breaking point, threatening to snap at any moment. In Chinese medicine, this is called a scattered pulse, the terminal signal of vital essence dispersing and organs failing. As Grandpa used to say, when a patient reaches the scattered pulse stage, one foot is already through death's door, and the other is teetering on the threshold. What happened? My voice came out calmer than I expected. Dr. Zhao wiped the sweat from his face. His voice thin and unsteady. This afternoon, all of Mr. Hart's vitals were stable, blood pressure and heart rate in normal range, oxygen saturation above 95. Then at 4:20, sudden deterioration. Within 3 minutes, his heart rate dropped from 62 to below 20. Blood pressure unreadable. We administered dopamine and atropine, no response at all. He pulled a folded lab report from his pocket and handed it to me. These are the results from the emergency blood draw half an hour ago. I had the lab rush it. I unfolded the report and went straight to the biochemistry panel. ALT, AST, creatinine, BUN, every marker in the red, alarmingly elevated, worse than the old man's admission values. But what really caught my attention was the potassium, 3.1 mol L, low enough to be concerning, but just barely within a specific, suspicious range. This was no coincidence. I gripped the report in my hand and looked up at Dr. Zhao, who administered medication to Mr. Hart today. Just the formula you prescribed, 1 dose of the blood-activating decoction this morning, nothing else. His tone was confident, then he paused, a memory surfacing. Wait, this afternoon, Mrs. Vivian Hart came to the ward. She said she was visiting on behalf of the old lady, stayed about 20 minutes. I stepped out mid-visit to take a phone call. He stopped himself mid-sentence. He didn't need to finish. I closed my eyes and drew a long, slow breath, forcing the surge of emotion back down. There was no time for blame now. The old man was hanging by a thread, and every second was precious. Everyone step back, lay the stretcher flat, dim the lights, open a window a crack for air circulation. I pulled my acupuncture kit from my pocket as I gave the orders, my tone leaving no room for argument. Derek stood at the entrance to the reception room, his brow furrowed into a deep, hard line. He watched me untie the red cord around the kit, then spoke, his voice low and taut. Do you have this? I looked up at him. His expression was as hard as ever, but deep in his eyes, something was trembling. Fear. This was a man who never flinched in the boardroom, who made ruthless decisions without hesitation. But right now, he was afraid. The frail old man on that stretcher was the only person in the world he truly cared about. Yes, one word. Then I turned my attention fully to Walter Hart. This situation was far more dire than the last. Previously, it had been a collapse caused by blocked chi. The core problem was obstruction, and the soul anchoring needle could clear it. But this time was different. The old man's vital essence had been forcibly shattered by an external force, like an ancient tree with weakened roots that had just been kicked hard at its base. His entire life system was teetering on the edge of collapse. The standard techniques wouldn't be enough. I needed the most dangerous maneuver in Grandpa's entire repertoire. The young revival needling. Grandpa had taught me this technique only once, with a stern warning. Never use it unless absolutely necessary. Its principle was to stimulate the meridians with extreme force, driving every last remnant of vital essence back to the dantian, essentially concentrating all the life force still burning in a person's body into a single point, preserving the core while sacrificing the periphery. Used well, the patient survives; used poorly, or if the patient's vital essence is already below the minimum threshold, that single needle accelerates death. Grandpa had been deadly serious when he'd said this. He'd told me that the hardest part of being a healer isn't learning the techniques, it's knowing when to use which one. The yang revival needling is the last card in your hand. Once you play it, there's no turning back. This was the moment to play it. I drew out the longest needle in the kit, a full 5 inches, noticeably thicker than the others. I wiped it with an alcohol swab 3 times, then began to feel along the old man's abdomen with my left hand, searching for the Guanyuan point. Guanyuan lies 3 inches directly below the navel, the foremost point on the conception vessel. Taoists call it the dantian. Chinese medicine calls it the root of vital essence. In any emergency involving vital essence, Guanyuan is the unavoidable focal point. But Walter Hart's condition complicated things. He'd been bedridden for months, his abdominal fat and muscle severely atrophied, his skin was as thin as rice paper, the intestines and blood vessels beneath clearly visible. Inserting a 5-inch needle at this location, with even a hair's breadth of error in angle or depth, could puncture the intestinal wall or damage the abdominal aorta. The consequences would be catastrophic. I took a deep breath. My left index finger fixed the position of Guanyuan. My right thumb and forefinger gripped the needle handle, the tip pressed vertically against the skin. Then I closed my eyes. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto me. Vivian Hart stood at the foot of the staircase, her face cycling through shades of white and red like a failing signal light. Serena Song hovered beside her, teacup frozen halfway to her lips, forgotten. Evan Hart had shrunk into the corner of the sofa, barely daring to breathe. Eleanor stood at the other end of the stretcher, her aged hand wrapped around the head of her cane so tightly that her knuckles had gone bone-white. Derek hadn't moved. He stood about 10 feet directly in front of me, hands shoved in his pockets, his expression like a slab of frozen granite. But his hands, I could see them in my peripheral vision, clenched into fists, the veins on the back standing out in sharp relief. I didn't look at anyone else. The silver needle in my hand pressed forward, slow and steady. The tip met slight resistance as it broke through the skin. I didn't force it. Instead, I adjusted the angle by a hair, following the natural grain of the fascia. 1 inch, 2, 3. When the needle reached roughly 3.5 inches deep, I felt something shift beneath the tip. The tissue density changed abruptly, like pushing through cotton and suddenly hitting a layer of packed gravel. This was the core of the Guanyuan point, the convergence point of vital essence. I stopped, gripping the handle between thumb and forefinger, and began to manipulate the needle. The Yang revival needling technique had nothing in common with ordinary acupuncture. Standard insertion and rotation followed a rhythm, measured, predictable, like a gentle piece of music, but this technique was brutal, almost savage. I twisted the handle with rapid-fire precision, my wrist already beginning to ache from the sheer speed, the needle humming in the air like an enraged hornet. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, sweat beaded on my forehead, my fingers trembled from the sustained high-frequency rotation, but I couldn't stop. The entire philosophy of the Yang revival needling rested on violence. You had to bombard the meridian system with overwhelming force, push it to its absolute limit, and force it to summon its last reserves in the face of extinction. The ECG monitor continued its shrill, desperate wailing. The green waveform had flattened into a thin, wavering line. Dr. Zhao stood in front of the monitor, his face white as paper, and mouthed something to the nurse beside him. I read the words on his lips. He's not going to make it. And then, Walter's body convulsed. The spasm came without warning, violent and sudden. His entire frame jerked on the stretcher. One arm that had been dangling over the edge snapping up and then crashing back down, like he'd been struck by a live current. Vivian screamed, but my heart settled. He responded, under the extreme stimulation of the Yang revival needling. Walter's meridian system had finally answered. Even a brief convulsion was proof that the vital essence still lingering in his body hadn't fully dispersed. It could still be rallied. I pressed my left hand against his abdomen at the Guanyuan point, switched my right hand from rotation to lifting and thrusting, and changed the rhythm from frantic to slow and deliberate. 9 shallow lifts, 1 deep thrust. Each deep insertion landed with surgical precision on the core of the point. This was the 9-cycle vitality restoration, the second phase of the Yang revival needling. The first phase used a storm to provoke the meridian system into response. The second phase used gentle, nourishing manipulation to anchor the rallied vitality back in the dantian, like herding startled birds back into their nest. Then closing the cage door 10 minutes later, the monitor's alarm fell silent. The green waveform that had nearly flattened into a straight line began to pulse again. At first the intervals were enormous, each beat seeming to strain against impossible odds. Then the gaps narrowed, the peaks climbed, heart rate crawled from single digits into the 40s, then from the 40s up to 55. Color returned to Walter's face. I withdrew the needle slowly, pressed an alcohol swab over the puncture point, and let out a long, ragged breath. My shirt was soaked through, the fabric clinging to my skin, cold and clammy. My legs felt like they were made of cotton. If not for sheer force of will, I would have collapsed right there on the floor. His stable, my own voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse and raw, for now, but he needs to be observed for the next 24 hours. No one in the room spoke. Eleanor released her cane, pressed both hands to her face, her shoulders trembling. Evan rose from the sofa, still wearing the dazed expression of someone who just watched a car wreck unfold. Vivian's complexion slowly returned from ghost white to something resembling normal, but her eyes kept darting away from mine, and she'd edged backward toward the staircase. Serena set down her teacup. The porcelain clinked against the saucer with a sharp, crystalline note. Her expression was perfectly managed. Polite, restrained concern painted across her features, but I noticed the hand holding the cup was trembling. Not from worry, from something far more complicated. Then I turned to look at Derek. He was still standing in the same spot, in the same posture as 10 minutes ago, but his eyes were different. Those deep black eyes were fixed on me now, churning with something I'd never seen in them before. Not scrutiny, not suspicion, not that condescending downward gaze. Shock, the look of a man who had spent his entire life controlling every variable in his world, only to discover that in a situation beyond his control, someone else had held the sky up for him. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He just pulled his hands from his pockets and took a single step toward me. That step never landed. Enough. Everyone's attention snapped to the staircase. Vivian stood on the third step, looking down at the entire room from above. The panic that had been written on her face moments ago had been replaced by something sharp and predatory. Her fingers gripped the banister, knuckles white. Mom, Derek's voice was ice cold, carrying an unmistakable note of finality. That's enough. But Vivian had no intention of stopping. Her gaze cut past Derek and landed directly on me, her lips trembling with barely contained agitation. Nora Lynn, what exactly did you do to Grandpa? Both times something went wrong, you were the one treating him. Is that really a coincidence? The first time, you stuck a needle in him and he recovered. Everyone hailed you as a miracle worker. Then he crashes again, you show up again, stick another needle in him, and he's fine again. Don't you think that's a little too convenient? Her voice rose with each sentence, climbing higher and sharper, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling of the room until the crystal chandelier seemed to vibrate with it. I've been in this family for over 30 years. I've seen all kinds of people. Someone of your background will use any trick in the book to climb the social ladder. Grandpa's illness is your leverage. If he doesn't recover, you're worthless. So every time he improves, he takes a turn for the worse, and every single time it happens just when you happen to be around to save him. Nora Lynn, are you going to stand there and tell me you had nothing to do with this? The words hit the room like a poison-tipped dart, sinking deep into everyone's chest because she had a point. It was too perfect. The first crisis, I just happened to be there. One needle, and I became the family's savior. The second crisis, I just happened to be there again. Another needle, and my position became untouchable. The timing, the location, the cast of characters, it all fit together so seamlessly that if I weren't the one holding the needle, even I would have suspected this was a scripted performance. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The admiration and gratitude in people's eyes turned hesitant, flickering. Even Eleanor frowned slightly, looking at me with a new layer of complicated assessment. Vivian caught the shift and pressed her advantage. Derek, think about it, a nurse who works odd shifts at a community clinic in Queens. How does she have this kind of skill? Even Dr. Zhao was at a loss, and she just sticks in a few needles and solves it. That's not medicine, that's theater. She's after the Hart family money. And all of this is a setup. I said enough. Derek's voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like chips of ice shattering on the floor. He turned to face Vivian, his tall frame blocking the light from the staircase, casting her entirely in shadow. Mom, when you visited Grandpa's room this afternoon, what did you do? The question was asked so calmly it might have been about the weather, but the air in the room froze solid. Vivian's face went white, whiter than the latex paint on the walls. Her pupils contracted violently. then dilated, her lips opened and closed, like a fish thrown onto dry land, gasping without sound. What are you talking about? Her voice shook, all trace of confidence gone. I went to see your grandfather, I'm his daughter-in-law. Is it not normal for me to visit him? Perfectly normal, Derek nodded, his tone still flat. Then why did you wait until Dr. Zhao stepped out to take a phone call? Vivian's lips trembled harder, she whirled toward Eleanor, her voice cracking. Mother, do you hear what he's saying? He's accusing me. I've taken care of Grandpa for all these years, even if there's no credit, there's the effort, and now he's taking the side of an outsider. Eleanor spoke suddenly, her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a small hammer striking the table. Vivian, tell me, who exactly is the outsider? Vivian froze. Eleanor took a step forward on her cane, her back ramrod straight, her silver hair catching the light with a cold gleam. My granddaughter-in-law, your son's legal wife, and in your mouth, she becomes an outsider. So tell me, who in this house counts as an insider? Vivian's face drained from white to an ugly shade of grey. She bit down hard on her lower lip and said nothing. Eleanor didn't look at her again. Instead, she slowly swept her gaze across everyone in the room. When her eyes passed over Evan, he shrank back into the sofa. When they reached Serena, she lowered her head. Finally, Eleanor's gaze settled on me, those eyes that had seen too much in a lifetime, holding something I couldn't quite name, something that looked a great deal like certainty. Tonight, I'm putting this on the record. The old lady's voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like it had been chiseled straight out of stone, unyielding, absolute. Nora Lynn is a heart now, she's my grandson's wife, and that's a fact whether anyone likes it or not, as long as she lives under this roof. She lives under this family's protection. Anyone who dares to lay a hand on her answers to me. She paused, then drove the butt of her cane into the floor with a single, heavy thud. As for Walter's 2 episodes, I'm going to have them investigated. Every person who walked into that room this afternoon, everything they touched, every move they made, none of it will slip through the cracks. And when I find out who's responsible, don't expect any mercy from me. Those last words she aimed directly at Vivian. Vivian's composure shattered, her face went from pale to ashen, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She spun on her heel and made for the stairs, her stilettos clattering against the marble in a frantic, staccato rhythm. Her retreat looked less like a dignified exit and more like a full-blown flight. Serena rose from her seat and gave the old lady a graceful, shallow bow. Madam Hart, it's getting late, I should be going. Walter needs his rest, I won't intrude any longer. Her tone remained warm, polished, perfectly measured. The old lady didn't try to keep her, she simply nodded, expression unreadable. As Serena passed me, her steps slowed, she turned her head and offered a small smile, lips curved at just the right angle. Warm and friendly on the surface. Miss Lynn, she murmured, low enough that only I could hear, your medical skill is genuinely impressive, I admire that, but marrying into the Hart family and actually standing firm inside it are two very different things. He's far more complicated than you think. With a slight nod, she glided out on her heels, the soft pink of her dress disappearing into the light spilling from the front entrance. I turned her words over in my mind, then filed them away for later. Now wasn't the time to dwell on Serena's song, Walter's condition, and Vivian's strange behavior. Those were the two fishhooks stuck in my throat, and until I pulled them out, sleep wasn't going to come easy. An hour later, Dr. Zhao got his hands on the afternoon security footage from the corridor outside Walter's room. The video captured Vivian's entire visit in clear detail, entering at 3:50, leaving at 4:08, 18 full minutes inside Walter's room. Her handbag had been flat when she went in. When she came out, it was visibly fuller, with a corner of white medical gauze peeking out from under the flap. When the old lady received the still frames, she was silent for a long time. The weight of what she was looking at seemed to press down on her shoulders, her weathered fingers tracing the edge of the printout. Once before she set it down, she didn't fly off the handle, she simply tucked the screenshots into her handbag, then beckoned me over and had me sit in the chair beside her. Child, you were wrong today. She took my hand in hers, her palm warm and dry against my skin. Vivian isn't a bad person at heart, but she's easily swayed, too quick to listen to the wrong voices. Grandma knows what's what. When it's time to deal with her, I'll deal with her. You just focus on treating Walter. Don't worry about anything else. I nodded, and only then did she rise and leave the manor. The rest of the guests scattered soon after. Evan practically sprinted out the front door. Like the house was on fire. A few distant relatives exchanged awkward glances before muttering their own excuses and slipping away. Within half an hour, The cavernous living room was down to just me, Walter on his stretcher, and Ryan Fang standing guard. Derek had gone up to the second-floor study. As I passed the door, I caught a glimpse through the half-open gap. He was seated behind his desk, a file spread out in front of him, but his gaze wasn't on the papers, it was fixed on the pitch-black night beyond the window, his right hand absently turning the wedding band on his finger, round and round. What he was thinking, I didn't know, and I wasn't about to ask right now. The priority was stabilizing Walter. I prepared a fresh batch of the ginseng aconite vitality decoction and administered it through his nasogastric tube. Ginseng and aconite as the primary actives, reinforced with cornelian cherry, dragon bone, and oyster shell to anchor his vital essence, plus small amounts of ligusticum and salvia to invigorate blood flow and clear the meridians. It was one of Grandpa Lin's crown jewel formulas, designed specifically for the aftermath of sudden vital collapse. For Walter's current state, it couldn't have been more fitting. By the time the medicine was in, it was nearly 11 p.m. Ryan stood guard at the door. I settled into the single armchair beside Walter's bed and stared at the monitor's readouts. His heart rate held steady around 58, blood pressure had climbed back to the low end of normal, oxygen saturation sat at 94%, every metric was dramatically better than where he'd been during the rescue. His life was, for now, out of immediate danger, but the toll on his vital essence had been severe. If another crisis hit anytime soon, even the young revival needling might not be enough to pull him back. To solve this at the root, I needed to understand exactly why he'd crashed twice. Was it simple deterioration, or was someone pulling strings in the dark at 7? The next morning, Ryan knocked on the door, a manila envelope in hand. Mrs. Hart. Mr. Reeves stayed up all night compiling these complete medication records and nursing logs from the day Walter was admitted, every piece of data from the past 3 months. He handed me the envelope, then added, "One more thing, after the old lady left last night, she went straight to Hart Group Tower and had Vivian removed from her position as figurehead CFO." My hand froze mid-reach. Removed? Yes, signed. The personnel action order on the spot. There was a note of genuine shock in Ryan's voice. Vivian held that nominal CFO title for over 20 years. She never touched real operations, but between salary and dividends, she was pulling in a 7-figure annual package. The old lady stripped both the position and the compensation, citing abuse of authority and misconduct. I was quiet for a moment. The old lady had moved too fast for this to be a spur-of-the-moment decision. This felt premeditated, like she'd been holding the hammer for a while, just waiting for the right moment to swing. Last night had merely been the spark that lit an already fused powder keg. The waters of the Hart family ran deeper than I'd realized. I opened the envelope and spread the documents across the coffee table. Flipping through them page by page, Walter had been admitted 3 months ago with a cerebral hemorrhage. After emergency craniotomy to clear the clot, he'd remained in a deep coma. Mercy General's treatment plan had focused on neurological recovery and life support maintenance. The medication records were thorough and followed standard neurological protocol. Nothing obviously wrong, but once I took over his care, things started shifting. The first night I treated him, he suffered a sudden collapse, vital chi violently expelled, heart rate plummeting to near zero. I pulled him back with the soul-anchoring needle. Over the next 3 days, his condition steadily improved, every indicator trending toward normal. Then on the 4th day, yesterday afternoon, he crashed again, harder than the first time. The timing of both episodes was too precise. The first hit on my wedding night, when Derek was away from the manor and Walter had no family at his side. The second came right after the old lady had publicly acknowledged me at the family gathering, the moment Vivian lost the most face. I flipped the nursing log to yesterday's page. Vivian's visit was recorded in neat handwriting, entered 15:50, left 16:08. What happened in those 18 minutes? The security footage couldn't tell us. It had video but no audio. From the images, Vivian had walked to Walter's bedside, bent down to check the monitor, then taken a damp piece of gauze from her handbag and gently wiped his forehead and palms on the surface. Nothing suspicious. Family members wiping down a comatose patient is routine care, but the question was, what exactly was on that gauze? I called Dr. Zhao over and laid the lab report in front of him, tapping the potassium column. Dr. Zhao, can you confirm something for me? Is there any drug that can be absorbed through the skin and cause potassium levels to drop and systemic organ function to fail rapidly? He leaned in, studied the report, and his brow furrowed. He pulled out his phone, made a call, and his face changed mid-conversation. When he hung up, He mouthed a single word at me: insulin. High-concentration insulin can absolutely be absorbed through skin contact and enter the bloodstream. A large dose would rapidly tank blood sugar and potassium, triggering multi-organ failure, and because insulin metabolizes so quickly in the body, standard blood tests would struggle to detect it hours later. That gauze in Vivian's handbag had very likely been soaked in a concentrated insulin solution. I sank back into the sofa, closed my eyes, and let the threads weave together. Dr. Zhao stepping out to take a call wasn't an accident. Vivian arriving precisely in that window wasn't a coincidence. The damp gauze wasn't routine care. Every piece of this had been staged: the timing, the method, the dosage, all carefully calculated so Walter would crash after Vivian had already left, leaving no direct evidence behind. Whoever designed this either had formal medical training or had someone with real expertise feeding them instructions. Vivian didn't have that kind of knowledge herself. Someone was behind her, and I already had a suspicion who. Serena's friendly warning last night now felt less like kindness and more like a declaration of war. She was the heiress of Song & Co., fine jewelry, and the Song family had done business with the Harts for years. She'd practically grown up in this house. She knew the family's inner workings and Walter's medical history inside out. Vivian had always wanted Serena as a daughter-in-law, and Serena had never hidden her feelings for Derek. Two women with aligned interests, working in tandem, it fit too well. Vivian handled the execution, Serena handled the strategy, one out front, one in the shadows, a seamless operation. The only wild card had been me. Neither of them expected that the countrybred wife Derek barely acknowledged could drag Walter back from death's door. Not once, but twice. I closed the envelope, stood up, and walked to Walter's bedside. The old man's color had improved considerably since last night. His breathing was steady, and while his pulse was still faint, it now carried a thread of substance beneath it, no longer that scattered, fraying rhythm that had threatened to dissolve at any moment. Last night's ginseng aconite vitality decoction had done its work, and the lingering effects of the young revival needling were still unfolding. His vital essence was slowly, stubbornly, knitting itself back together. But I knew this was only temporary. As long as the hand behind the shadows was still out there, the old man's life would remain suspended on a knife's edge. I had to drag every hidden current to the surface. Before the next crisis hit that afternoon, I had Ryan Fang drive me to the Hart Group Tower. The building stood in the heart of the financial district, 36 stories of glass and steel that caught the cold November light and threw it back in sharp, glittering fragments. The modern sculpture out front rose taller than a man, all angular lines and aggressive ambition. Ryan swiped his security keycard and led me through the marble lobby, down 3 long corridors, until we stopped before a pair of solid oak double doors marked with a discreet brass plaque. CEO Blake Chen was stationed outside. When he saw me, he visibly faltered. Mrs. Hart, what brings you here? Mr. Hart is in a meeting. Tell him to come out, I said. Blake's expression froze. He looked at me, then at the closed doors, then back at me, his lips parting and closing as he tried to figure out how to handle a situation that had never come up before. The doors opened from the inside. Derek Hart stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 or 5 executives in tailored suits, each clutching a folder, clearly just wrapped up from a major meeting. He wore a charcoal black custom suit, his tie knotted with surgical precision, and the air around him radiated a cold, deliberate distance. His gaze landed on me, one eyebrow lifting a fraction, then he stepped aside and let the executives file past. When the corridor was empty, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, looking down at me from his full height. Is Grandpa all right? He's fine. Then why are you here? His tone was flat, but not as icy as before. It sounded more like exhaustion. I came for an answer. I met his eyes without flinching. Someone is threatening your grandfather's life. You shouldn't be in the dark about that. Derek was silent for a few seconds, then he turned his head toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the corridor. The afternoon sun split his profile into light and shadow, his straight nose casting a sharp, clean line across his cheek. Without a word, he pushed the office door open and gestured for me to enter. His office was vast, so vast it felt empty. A full wall of glass faced the city skyline, and the floor was covered in deep grey wool carpet that swallowed every sound. His desk held nothing but a laptop and a minimalist lamp. The entire room matched the man himself, cold, immaculate, and designed to keep people at arm's length. I stood before the desk and handed him the security footage stills of Vivian and the lab report copies. He read them for a long moment, his face betraying nothing, but when he set the papers down, his knuckles had gone white. and the edge of the printout bore a deep crease where his fingers had pressed too hard. He raised his eyes to mine, dark and unreadable. "What do you want me to do? Find out who's behind it," I said, including Serena Song. "She said something to me before she left last night. Is far more complicated than you think. She wants you, and she wants the position that comes with being Mrs. Hart. Your mother is happy to play matchmaker. The two of them have a tacit understanding, each taking what the other needs." Derek went quiet. He leaned back against the edge of his desk, palms braced on the surface, eyes fixed on the floor. The exhaustion radiating off him was unlike anything I'd seen before. The phone rang. Derek picked up the receiver. Blake's voice came through the line. "Mr. Hart, there's a gentleman in the lobby asking for Mrs. Hart. He says his name is Gu. He claims to be her former fiancé. Former fiancé." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Derek's fingers tightened around the receiver. His gaze slid from the phone to my face, and that familiar look of scrutiny returned, but this time, there was something else layered beneath it. Not suspicion, something closer to territorial instinct, sharp and unmistakable. "Have him wait downstairs," he said into the phone. Then hung up. He looked at me, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, humorless smile. "Your ex-fiancé has come calling. Aren't you going to see him?" I leaned back against the chair across from his desk, arms crossed, voice flat. "Mr. Hart, that chapter of my life is water under the bridge, though you seem oddly invested in the title." Derek's smile vanished. He didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed his suit jacket from the coat rack, draped it over his arm, and walked out of the office ahead of me. The elevator ride down was silent. We were alone in the car, Derek standing half a step behind my right shoulder. The scent of cedarwood cologne drifted toward me, mingled with the faint, lingering trace of cigarette smoke. In the enclosed space, it was almost overwhelming. He didn't speak, neither did I. We maintained a delicate, wordless standoff all the way to the lobby. In the reception area, a man stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wore a deep navy cashmere coat, tall and straight-backed. When he heard our footsteps, he turned, revealing a face that was gentle and refined. His features weren't conventionally handsome, but they came together in a way that felt warm and trustworthy. When he smiled, the corners of his eyes curved into soft arcs, like an older brother you could let your guard down around. Liam Gu. 3 years hadn't changed him much. His skin was a shade darker, his jawline sharper than I remembered, but those warm, steady eyes were exactly the same, the kind of eyes that made you feel at ease just by looking at them. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. Then he noticed Derek walking behind me, and the light in his gaze dimmed, replaced by a polite, restrained smile. "Nora," he said my name like we'd seen each other yesterday. "How did you find me?" I stopped, keeping a deliberate distance between us. Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of letter paper. It was old, the creases worn soft at the edges. He unfolded it and held it out to me. It was the letter I'd written to Dr. Marcus Gu 3 years ago. Before I left the Gu household, the last line read, "If fate allows, we'll meet again in the city." My father found it while sorting through old things last month. Liam said, "I've been looking for you for 3 years. You changed your number. You moved. The clinic was torn down. I followed every lead I could find, and then, last week, someone spotted you at the Hart wedding." He gave a faint, rueful smile. "I didn't expect you to be married." He said it softly, but every word carried the weight of 3 years. Before I could respond, Derek's voice cut through the air, cold as midwinter frost. "Mr. Gu, Nora is my wife now. If you have something to say it directly. No need to circle around it." He dropped the formality of my surname and called me by my first name. The 2 syllables rolled off his tongue with deliberate intimacy, like a flag planted on contested ground. Liam's gaze lingered on Derek for 2 seconds, then shifted to me, his expression turning serious. "Nora, I'm not here to reminisce. I'm here because the International Neuromedicine Institute reached out to my father. They need you back urgently. That project from 3 years ago, the one codenamed Meridian. There's a problem." Meridian, the word turned like a key in a lock I'd long since sealed shut, cracking open a door in the deepest part of my memory. After I left the Gu household 3 years ago, I had spent time at INMI. My grandfather had just passed. I was alone in the city with no family, no anchor. It was Liam's father, Dr. Marcus Gu, tenured professor at Harvard Medical School, who recommended me to Dr. Harold Chen, the institute's chief scientist. Chen had read through my grandfather's handwritten manuscripts and, on the spot, brought me onto the most critical project team. Project Meridian. It was a pioneering initiative at the intersection of Eastern and Western medicine, using modern scientific methods to decode the material basis of traditional Chinese meridian theory. I spent a year on the team, leading the clinical acupuncture verification phase. Then, for reasons I still hadn't fully reconciled, I walked away. When I left, Chen handed me a signed lab report and said, "Nora, this project can turn without anyone, but it won't turn well without you. If you ever want to come back, there will always be a place for you here." I never thought I'd go back. Dr. Chen says the phase 3 clinical trial has hit a wall. Liam's voice pulled me back to the present. Over 20 trial participants developed adverse reactions to the new protocol. 3 have been admitted to the ICU. The lab has reviewed the data 3 times and can't find the cause. Dr. Chen says you're the only one who understands the foundational logic of the protocol well enough to pinpoint what went wrong. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced an envelope. It was my standard manila envelope, stamped with a red urgent seal, the flap secured with Dr. Chen's signature. Across the adhesive strip I took it, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. Chen's script was distinctive, straight and precise like typeface, except every final stroke curled upward with a stubborn, old-school scholarly pride. Derek stepped forward, his tall frame sliding between me and Liam. He didn't look at Liam, he looked down at me, that sharp, assessing gaze tinged with something I couldn't quite name. "You're going, 20-something lives." I tucked the envelope into my pocket. "I don't have a reason to say no." His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, then relaxed. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to its usual hard-edged composure. "And what about Grandpa's treatment? Your father's condition is stable now. I'll compile the follow-up treatment plan into a detailed written document and hand it to Director Zhao, with all medication and acupuncture points clearly marked. As long as it's followed on schedule, there won't be any problems. If an unexpected situation arises, I can provide remote guidance or fly back at any time. But the Lingshu project is something only I can handle. If I don't go, those 3 people might die." After I said this, I looked up at him. Huasihan was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly, without any warning, reached out and grasped my wrist. His palm was large, his 5 fingers long and powerful, the grip around my wrist bone neither too tight nor too loose, just enough that I couldn't break free, the wedding ring on. His ring finger pressed against the back of my hand, the metal cool to the touch. "Mr. Gu." Huasihan turned to look at Gu Linshan, his voice steady and devoid of any emotion. "Please wait downstairs for 10 minutes. I have a few words I need to say to my wife in private." He emphasized the words "my wife" heavily, as if deliberately hammering them into someone's ears. Gu Linshan glanced at me, then at Huasihan's hand on my wrist. A flicker of complex emotion passed through his eyes, but in the end, he said nothing, gave a slight nod, and turned to walk toward the lobby entrance. Huasihan pulled me into the fire escape stairwell next to the elevator. The heavy fire door closed behind us, sealing off all the sounds from the lobby. The stairwell was quiet, with only the motion-activated light above buzzing faintly. The harsh white light carved Huasihan's features into sharp, angular relief. He released my wrist but didn't step back, standing less than a step away, looking down at me from his height. "How many more things about you do I not know?" he asked. The question almost made me laugh. "Mr. Hua." I leaned against the wall, tilting my head up to look at him. "When exactly did you start wanting to know about me?" "On our wedding night, when you left me alone in the bridal suite. Did you ever think about getting to know me? The next morning, when you suspected I had ulterior motives, did you think about it? When your mother humiliated me in front of everyone, did you say a single word on my behalf?" He was silent for a moment. "That's different." "How is it different? You're my wife." Those 5 words came out of his mouth with a strange sense of contradiction, an assertive declaration, yet tinged with a hesitation he himself didn't seem to notice. As if he were trying to hold on to something he wasn't sure he could still grasp. I looked at him without speaking. "International Medical Laboratory, codename Lingshu, core member, withdrew 3 years ago." He recited my credentials word by word, like reviewing a background investigation report on a business rival. "Your file says you're a part-time worker at a community clinic. Your real identity is a core expert in a top-tier international medical project. Shen Yanqing, how many more cards are you hiding?" "Quite a few." I met his gaze directly. "But Mr. Hua, whether I reveal my cards or not is my choice. You never treated me as one of your own from the start, so why should you expect me to hold nothing back from you?" That hit him. I saw his pupils contract slightly, his jawline tighten again, and his Adam's apple bob once. He raised a hand, loosened his tie knot left and right, then took a deep breath, as if making a very difficult decision. "I'm sorry, 3 words, very soft, yet strikingly clear in the empty stairwell. I froze. Huasihan, hearing "I'm sorry" from his mouth was more unbelievable than me pulling his father back from death's door with the revival needle. What happened on our wedding night was my fault. His voice was low, so low it seemed meant only for himself. Whatever reason you married into the Hua family, you are my wife, Huasihan's wife. The respect and protection I owe you, every bit of it, should have been given. What I didn't give before, I'll make up for. He didn't look at me as he spoke. His gaze fixed on a patch of peeling paint on the opposite wall. His expression remained his usual cold hardness, but the exhaustion and sincerity in his voice were impossible to hide. This man had probably rarely bowed his head to anyone in his life, so his apology was clumsily pitiful, like someone picking up a paintbrush for the first time, trying to paint a flower. I was silent. The silence stretched on, so long that the motion-activated light above automatically turned off, plunging the entire stairwell into darkness. In the dark, I could only hear his breathing, close by, steady yet carrying a faint unnatural urgency. Huasihan, I said in the darkness, I need to go to the lab. When I come back, if you still want to make it up, I'll give you the chance. He didn't answer, but a second later, I felt a hand take mine. The palm was dry and warm, the grip gentle, not like the controlling hold on my wrist earlier, but more like a cautious, tentative reach. The motion-activated light flickered back on. He let go, resumed his usual cold expression, and pushed open the fire door. Go, I'll handle things with your father. As I walked out of the stairwell, I glanced back. He stood by the fire door, backlit by the lobby light, his figure outlined as a tall, solitary silhouette. Those deep black eyes watched me, emotions churning within them that I couldn't name, but I knew something had already begun to change that night. Gu Linshan drove me to the headquarters of the International Medical Laboratory. The lab was located in a tech park in the northern suburbs of the capital, 3 grey-white buildings arranged in a U-shape. At 11 p.m., the lab was still brightly lit, with pale light spilling from the windows on the 2nd and 3rd floors, where I could faintly make out figures in white coats moving back and forth. Chen Buiyuan was waiting for me at the entrance of the lab building. 3 years had passed, and his hair had turned mostly white. The wrinkles on his face deepened, but his eyes were still, as I remembered, sharp, focused, commanding respect without anger. Seeing me get out of the car, he hurried over and grasped my hand, his voice trembling slightly. Nianqing, you're finally here, Teacher Chen. I bent slightly, offering him a bow according to the etiquette my grandfather had taught me. No need for formalities, lives are at stake. Chen Buiyuan pulled me straight into the lab building, speaking as we walked. The Phase 3 clinical trial recruited 28 volunteers, all patients with refractory neurological damage sequelae. The new protocol is an upgraded version of your combined acupuncture and medication therapy from back then. We added targeted nanocarrier technology. Theoretically, efficacy should be 3 to 5 times higher, and the first 2 weeks of data looked excellent, but starting from the 3rd week, subjects began experiencing unexplained liver dysfunction, declining kidney function, and severe electrolyte imbalances. As of today, the 3 most severe cases are in the ICU. He pushed open the conference room door. Inside sat 7 or 8 researchers in white coats, each with thick data reports spread out before them, all wearing the same look of anxiety and frustration. I spent the entire night going through all the experimental data and case reports from start to finish. As dawn approached, I found the problem. It wasn't the medication, the acupuncture, or the technical approach. The issue lay in the surface modification of the nanocarriers. The RAND-D team, in pursuit of higher targeting efficiency, had added a layer of positively charged polymer coating to the carrier surface. This coating did increase drug accumulation in the brain fourfold, but it also triggered a delayed immune inflammatory response in the liver and kidneys. This reaction wouldn't manifest early in treatment but would intensify with drug accumulation, erupting around the 3rd week. This was a classic case of good intentions leading to bad outcomes. Everyone was doing what they thought was right, but they overlooked the most fundamental taboo in the underlying pathological logic my grandfather used to tell me. That traditional Chinese medicine treats illness by strengthening the body's vital energy and eliminating pathogens. And when vital energy is deficient, one shouldn't attack aggressively. The liver and kidney function of neurological injury patients is already fragile. Hitting them with high-intensity positively charged carriers is like opening another breach in an already weakened dam. I presented my conclusions and corrective plan in full at an emergency meeting that afternoon, proposing 2 remedial measures. First, Immediately discontinue all carrier drugs with the positive charge coating and switch to neutral liposomes instead. While targeting efficiency would drop by 40%, safety would be fully controllable. Second, provide individualized traditional Chinese medicine detoxification and liver-kidney protective treatment for subjects already showing adverse reactions. With me personally designing the protocols after hearing my report, Chen Boyuan was silent for a long time. Finally, he stood up and, in front of everyone in the conference room, bowed deeply to me. Nianqing, when you left 3 years ago, I said this project could keep running without anyone else, but without you, it couldn't achieve the best results. Now I'll say it again, the Lingshu project cannot do without you. After the meeting, I walked out of the conference room and leaned against the wall in the corridor, letting out a long breath. Over 20 hours of continuous work, plus the 2 emergency rescues earlier and the overnight analysis, my body was finally signaling its protest. My temples throbbed. Acid churned in my stomach, and my legs felt as heavy as lead. I braced myself against the wall and slowly crouched down, burying my head between my knees, eyes closed, waiting for the dizziness to pass. From the other end of the corridor came rapid footsteps, growing closer, the rhythm of leather shoes striking the plastic flooring sharp and resolute. The footsteps were familiar, so familiar that I knew who it was without looking up. The footsteps stopped in front of me. I raised my head and saw Hua Sihan standing there, his hair slightly disheveled, 2 buttons of his shirt collar undone, suit jacket draped over his arm. Clearly having come straight from the airport, he looked down at me crouched on the floor, frowned slightly, and then did something I never expected. He casually draped his suit jacket over a nearby chair, crouched down, and lowered himself to eye level with me. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. 26 hours. My voice was hoarse, not even sounding like my own. He said nothing, pulled out his phone from his suit pocket, opened a photo, and held it out to me. The photo showed Walter Hart propped up against the hospital bed, his eyes cracked open just a sliver, his lips moving faintly as if he were trying to speak to someone. His face was still gaunt, the bones sharp beneath the skin, but there was something different now, a light in those clouded eyes that hadn't been there in months. It was the first flicker of life, of presence, that anyone had seen in nearly 4 months. He was awake, Walter Hart was awake. I stared at that photograph for a long, long time. The world around me seemed to fall away, leaving only that image burned into my retinas, and then, without warning, my eyes went hot, tears spilled over before I could stop them, rolling down my cheeks in silent, messy streams. I buried my face back into my knees, my shoulders shaking with quiet, uncontrollable tremors, not from exhaustion, not from hurt, but because it was worth it. 2 rescues from the jaws of death, 2 sleepless nights fighting with everything I had, the doubt, the humiliation, the calculated schemes stacked against me, all of it, every single bitter moment, dissolved into meaning the instant those eyes opened. "Grandpa, I didn't let you down." Derek didn't say a word. He just stayed crouched in front of me, waiting in patient silence. He let the moment breathe, let my shoulders shake themselves still. Only when the trembling finally subsided did he reach out. His hand hovering just above my back, suspended in the air for a heartbeat, as if he wasn't sure the gesture would be welcome. Then, hesitantly, he let it land, a light pat, awkward, almost clumsy. "Let's go home." 3 words, just 3, but this time, they carried warmth. I wiped my eyes, pushed myself to my feet, and followed him out of the research building. The November night air bit at my skin, carrying the sharp edge of early winter. The parking lot lights pooled around Derek from behind, painting his silhouette in a soft golden glow. He walked ahead of me, unhurried, his pace measured, and every few steps, he glanced back, just to make sure I was still there. I thought of Eleanor's words, ringing in my memory like a bell. "You are a heart now. If anyone dares say a single word against you, they answer to me." And I thought of Derek's voice in that stairwell, that clumsy, almost painfully awkward apology. "I'm sorry." Maybe this contract marriage had started in ruins, but the ending didn't have to be.